Believe you can, and you are halfway there. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. A very happy new year to all of you who are watching us tonight on Face the Nation, and all the very best to you. Let at least be some sort of hope for Sri Lanka as we move forward. Today's topic of discussion today is current state of affairs in Sri Lanka. Joining us this evening on the show are Dr. Ratna, President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Dharanath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute, Ambika Satkaranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, as well as Nadishani Pereira, Executive Director, Transparency International Sri Lanka. To pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate right is Tharunika Ratna from Newsfirst, and on to immediate left is Shihar Anis, Executive Director of the Center for Investigative Reporting. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. You can WhatsApp your messages to 076 656 5353. The number once again, 076 656 5353. Let's tonight get the ball rolling with Dr. Ratna, President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association. What is your take on Sri Lanka's current state of affairs?
Yes, Shamir, thank you for inviting. Actually, now I am the immediate past president of SLMA. I have just, in a few days, I'll be handing over the responsibilities to Dr. Ananda Vijay Vikrama. So, anyway, so what's the state of affairs in Sri Lanka right now? So, last year we have, particularly looking at it from a social perspective, or the impact on the social lives of people. I think it has been a very, very difficult year. Honestly, I don't see the coming year to be any better unless some drastic changes happen, and also those drastic changes could happen, particularly on the governance side, because it's supposed to be an election year. But if you look at what has happened during the year, we have seen, of course, the impact of the economic crisis on social sector, mainly the public health sector, education, and also areas such as social protection. So it has been, you could really see the impact in terms of nutritional status of children, food insecurity, all that. But with all those negative impacts, we have also seen how people have been trying to cope. And this coping has been very challenging for the most vulnerable sectors of our country, particularly the low-income groups, and who also don't have a voice. So what we have seen is that most people, it was also like indicated in some of the recent surveys. You must have seen the Department of Census and Statistics, a very recent survey where, you know, they confirmed some of the earlier findings through other surveys. Now, some of the studies that have been done were sample studies, and not a very large sample, but in the case of this particular household survey on impact of economic crisis, really confirmed that over 60% of households have decreased their total household average monthly income, and expenditure has reached over 90%. And how did it manifest? It manifested in children not regularly going to school. And if you have more than 2-3 children, then, you know, they are fed in a very different way. Some children go to school on selected days, and, you know. So I think if you look at the response from the state, it hasn't been honestly satisfactory. And particularly in areas like the health sector, we have seen the disastrous effects, and particularly of results of corruption that has taken place. And we have been trying to make representations, you know, for the last more than 1.5–2 years. And if certain actions have been taken at the beginning of the year, this situation wouldn't have risen. And it's so unfortunate to see how the number of lives that were lost because of corruption, and also low quality medicines being distributed to state hospitals. And now with the current increases in prices, which is also having a big impact on the price of drugs and other consumables, as well as equipment that are required for medical care, I think we are going into a deeper crisis unless there are I mean, everybody knows that we have to make a sacrifice, I think, but the problem is that there's no equity in terms of who is being affected, and that some of these measures are disproportionately affecting the poor. So I think even the professionals would support if there's justice, if there's equity in some of these decisions, whether it is taxation to other measures that are taken. So I think in this year, these determining factors need to change so that there's a level playing field. And if that is not there, I don't think it's going to improve, but it's an opportunity for the people now, because it's a decisive year where we will have elections after several years, and people's voice can be heard through democratic means. So we need democracy being again strengthened, and rule of law being re-established. If not, without those fundamentals, I don't think this year we can the Sri Lanka can turn the corner.
Dr. Vinay, you spoke about the fact that everyone has to make sacrifices. But is it fair when the health sector crisis took place, we saw the manner in which how a certain party was making money. There was so much of corruption there. We saw when the sugar scam took place for the second to third time in Sri Lanka last year, people were making money. Despite the fact that the innocent people in Sri Lanka are making a sacrifice, do you think the political parties, the politicians, the ministers are making that sacrifice?
Absolutely not. I mean, the ruling class, I don't think have made any sacrifice. That's what I said. So that's very unfortunate. I mean, there's no empathy also. I mean, it starts from there. You know, you have to have, particularly in a sector like health, you need to feel for the people. You know, they are suffering. Otherwise, you can't make a change. But we have seen so much indifference and lack of empathy. And I mean, health sector is probably the last sector that anyone would want to make money by, you know, supplying low quality drugs, or even sometimes they are not even drugs. I mean, they are just, you know, some other material packed in bottles and treated, given for treatment to the system in a very organized way. Okay. And we have seen deterioration of ethical principles also, because we have unfortunately seen some of the professionals also colluding with these parties to, you know, to rob and
to make money.
Yeah, earn money.
Let's not forget, Dr. Venya, we had a health minister a couple of months ago who said that there is a reason for funeral parlors to be next to hospitals, because they need to service them as well. So it's very sad that we are in a situation like that in a country where we're talking that the people have had immense suffering over the last few years. Let's now move our attention towards Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute. Dhananath, let me pose a question to you to get some direction to the show tonight. When we speak about institutes like your organization, many of the view that your organization or organizations that are advocating for economic reforms must be now very happy because VAT has been increased to 18%. Government tax collection has been very good. We saw the manner in which how Dr. Harsh De Silva said that there has been a significant improvement as far as tax revenue collection is concerned. So my question to you now is, are you happy now, Dhananath?
So Shamir, what we recommended and advocated in the very show was main 5 key reforms. First, starting with the social safety nets. And that has been implemented to an extent. There are a lot of loopholes. And then second one is on the state-owned enterprises reforms, which hasn't taken off yet. And third was on connecting to global trade, because we have to grow the economy. And fourth, also the debt restructuring and sticking to the IMF program, because we didn't see any other solution given the difficult time that we passed through. And also on the deregulation to allow businesses. So there is no reason for us to be happy, because none of those have been basically implemented to the expected level that we advocated. But on the other side, those main reforms are, Shamir, whoever who comes to power, I would say non-negotiable, because I do not see any other option without doing those reforms, without improving our social safety net, without reforming our state-owned enterprises, without the governance reforms and the transparency reforms. I do not see a future. But on the people's point of view, I think people have to understand what are they paying for, because now the cost of living has drastically increased. I think there are multiple taxes. I think everyone's focus is on the VAT and the pay tax, which was imposed last year. But I think the massive amount that the people are paying for the inflation tax. I saw the central bank has been commended on bringing down the inflation for about 3%. I think they have to be commended, but also they were the same bank who brought the inflation pushed up to 72%. So when your inflation hits 72%, that's the worst tax that you can impose on anybody. And that's why the cost of living is so high, because if you recall, the inflation coming down doesn't mean the prices are coming down. If you recall earlier, it's not too long ago that the 1 kilogram of rice was about 90 to 98 rupees. Now it's 200 rupees. So just because inflation came down, the prices didn't come down, and we are paying actually that inflation tax and the VAT and the rest of the taxes on top of it. But rather than complaining, I would also like to propose few suggestions. One option is there's this special commodity levy, which you just spoke about, which is causing a lot of corruption, because that's the tax that the minister can impose overnight through a gazette notification and also remove overnight, and that opens for corruption, and the IMF report itself has said that has to remove. And when I check the list from the Sri Lanka customs, there's a whole lot of special commodity levy on the food items. I think that has to go away, because people are suffering, and in terms of food security, that tax has to go away. And when I check the numbers, they're expecting about 95 billion rupees of collection by imposing taxes on food, which I think is unfair, because people are paying VAT, which is now at 18%, which is at the extreme end. Corporates are paying 30%, that is also on the extreme end. Pay is the highest tier is at 36%, which is also at the extreme end. So I think the taxes on food now, if you look at, for instance, spats 100 rupees per kilogram, yogurt 2000 rupees per kilogram, dairy spreads 2000 rupees per kilogram, red onions 50 rupees per kilogram. I think those are the common food items that the poor people use. So I think that has to go away, so then at least you can bring the food costs down, and then at least there's food security you can establish. So I think that's one suggestion. But on the other hand, from the government's point of view, what is expected from the VAT increase is 1,500 billion rupees. Our interest cost is 2,500 billion. So even the VAT is not adequate at all, at least to cover our interest. So I think government has taken the option to collect the taxes on the easiest channel, which is VAT, and that is what is adding burden on the people.
So Dhananath, yesterday when I was looking at these figures, and I had a chat with a very senior corporate in Sri Lanka, a leader, and we spoke about the lava curve, and the lava curve very clearly illustrates that cutting tax rates can result in increased total tax revenue. So do you think that this is the way out for Sri Lanka to ensure that you collect more taxes? You have to cut down the tax rates so you can encompass everyone to the social tax revenue as far as Sri Lanka is concerned.
There are two sides, Shamir. One is, first is you have to simplify the tax system. Now, without simplifying, just cutting the taxes will not help. At the same time, just increasing the tax rates will also not increase the tax revenue. So first thing is to simplify the tax system, because if you look at our tax system, it's very complicated. From the border at the customs, from the inland revenue department, it's very complicated. And there are 4 tax principles. First is simplicity. That's why I mentioned you have to bring down the number of taxes. Second is the transparency. Third is the neutrality. Fourth is the stability. So if you want to really get that optimum point on the Laffer curve, you have to stick to those 4 tax principles. And when you stick to those principles only, you can improve the government revenue. And if they do that, of course, institutes like us would be happy, Shamir.
Thank you very much, Dhananath. So you are trying to tell me that you are not as optimistic as you were a couple of months ago when we got the IMF tranche.
I'm still optimistic. Of course, it is not optimistic. I mean, the situation is quite bad, but you know, I know hope is not a strategy, but we have to be hopeful, and that's why I think we all are around this table discussing these ideas over and over again, because you really cannot give up. And the people of Sri Lanka has to somehow come out, and we have to navigate as people, as civil society, as journalists together, because if we are not hopeful and if we give up, who will do it? I think we have to take the responsibility as responsible citizens, and we have to push for the reforms, and that is a never-ending battle. But I think while some are jumping out of the boat, we have to stay on the boat and somehow navigate. It's a difficult process, it's a tiring process, it's a long process. But like you are doing this show for multiple years, Shamir, we always have to be hopeful and voice for the right thing.
I'm still in the boat, Dana.
So as we
Dana, when you spoke about the tax collection and so on and so forth, I remember Ronald Reagan's quote: the government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. The government is not subsidizing whatsoever, but tax as much as possible. I now move my attention towards Ambika Satkaranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Ambika, let me also pose a question just to get some direction. We saw the manner in which how there was a rollout in Sri Lanka the last few weeks in terms of arresting those who were bringing down drugs to Sri Lanka. It was dubbed as the Yuka Program. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that it was done in a very practical manner, pragmatic way, or was it a media gimmick again by the government?
I think I called it theatrics. And it is theatrics because, well, for many reasons. Firstly, the people who are leading it, and before you ask, because I know you will ask, do I take responsibility because I'm going to mention names, etc. Yes, I will take responsibility for everything I say.
Goes without saying, Ambika.
Yeah, but you will ask, so I'm just making it, you know. So the two people leading it, one is, of course, the Minister of Public Security, Tiran Alas, who we know has a patchy record in terms of abiding by the rule of law, has a history of that. And then, of course, the recent revelation also in the Pandora Papers, no explanation given. If it was another country, they would have demanded explanations. The person would have had to resign, nothing. Secondly, of course, we have the acting IGP, Deshabandhu Tenokon, who also recently had yet another judgment against him. That is a Supreme Court decision that found that he had violated the protection against torture enshrined in the Constitution. So if I were in another country, that person would have immediately resigned. And of course, the police themselves the government has to take action against him because he has violated a fundamental right enshrined in the Constitution. Except in Sri Lanka, of course, nothing. We don't even talk about it. Then the way that this is being conducted. Drugs is not a new thing. We've had drugs being channeled into, trafficked into Sri Lanka for a long time. For a considerable amount of time, Sri Lanka has also been a transit point, which means there has been a lot of drugs. But why is it then that you're seeing this massive operation only now? Does that mean that until now they turned a blind eye to it? If so, why and who was benefiting? Right now, the way they're conducting is that this is not a targeted, focused operation based on particular intelligence. This is where they're going into areas, mainly poor areas, where they're conducting searches, arbitrary searches without search warrants, where they're also using abusive language, they are destroying property, they are also using violence. They are arresting people who do not have drugs on their person, no reasonable suspicion, no evidence, because now my friends who represent people arrested for drug offences tell me that their past clients have been arrested. People who were at some point arrested or had been discharged or currently on bail or had gone or had been sent to a rehabilitation centre are all being targeted and arrested, although they did not have drugs on their person and there is no evidence that they have.
But don't you think, Ambika, a stop has to be put on this drug menace in Sri Lanka by hook or by crook?
Well, no, there is no by crook. If we are for the rule of law, there is no by crook, right? Now, let's see, how much have they seized so far? They started on the 16th of December. Today is the 3rd of January. As of 31st December 2023, they had seized only 11.6 kilograms of heroin. How little is that? How much comes into the country? How much is seized? 11.6 is how much of crystal meth? 8.3 kilograms, which is absolutely nothing. So if you're arresting 20,000 persons, you have overcrowded, the prisons are now overcrowded at 196%. Right? They have sent over 1,200 persons to rehabilitation centers where there is actually no rehabilitation provided. All this is also a drain on state resources, right? Because you do have to feed people in prison. Rehabilitation centers as well. But what benefit are you getting from it? Absolutely nothing. So it's further undermining the rule of law, creating insecurity, targeting the poor, and it is theatrics to distract us from, you know, the Supreme Court judgments and various other.
Right. Very quickly, Ambika, before I move to Nadishani for her thoughts in the first round. Today, the news comes in saying that the CEB cracks down on social media used by employees. Now, the ban has been effective since December 19th, 2023. At a time, we're talking about a social media ban. Matters of this sort that's coming up seems not right. Something is not right somewhere. And the government seems to have taken completely the law into their own hands when matters of this sort happens. You know, CEB, a government institution, telling employees a strict social media ban will be imposed on the employees. This is not right.
Well, the government has always disregarded the rule of law, which is why we have impunity in this country. But where the social media ban on the CEB employees is concerned, usually employers, particularly, you know, they have internal rules that people are supposed to abide by in terms of how you use social media. That is on the one side. But here, if the information they're putting out is in the public interest, if they have tried to bring attention to it, if they are exposing corruption and wrongdoing, we need to have whistleblower protection in this country. Instead, we don't. Someone exposes corruption or wrongdoing, what happens is that the person is penalized, the person loses the job or worse. And that once again goes back to the lack of effective systems and processes of governance in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, Ambika Satkaranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention towards Nadishani Pereira, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Nadishani, when looking at all this, what's happening in Sri Lanka, as a civil rights organization, what are your thoughts?
Well, it is disappointing. I'll just start with the positive. The positive.
There is the positive.
Yes.
Wow.
The positive thing.
I'm listening.
Yes, that's what I said, because the rest would be negative. It began with the Arala. I would say this social awakening we saw among ordinary people, especially among the youth, in terms of the impact of corruption on their day-to-day lives. It was very difficult to make this connection. As an organization trying to raise awareness on corruption and mobilize people to rise against corruption for 20 years, the kind of interest we have seen last year, I mean, no, it's 2022 onwards, and remaining to some extent, although they are unable to protest the way they did during Arala because of the suppression that is going on, that is there. We get a lot of interest about, you know, what can we do to fight corruption? Can we, you know, contribute? Even things like how to get stolen assets back. We are not going to, I mean, we hear things like we're not going to vote again for these corrupt people. Young people saying things like, you know, tell us about the new anti-corruption law. You know, this interest is phenomenal. I mean, we see a big difference. And that is the positive. That gives that hope that Dhananath is saying, that this time around, you know, that people will hopefully, vote differently, hopefully, and contribute to the fight against corruption, because you need every stakeholder on board.
I have to interrupt you, Nadishani,
Sure.
but do you think that positive that took place a few months ago, just over a year ago in Sri Lanka, has transformed into something substantive in the country at present? Has that happened? Can we be happy that Arala transformed Sri Lanka into something else?
I was referring to a mindset change that is happening, mainly among the younger people, you know. So for it to translate into a major transformation, more things have to happen. And a severe block there would be the lack of political will. So, you know, there is so much so that people can do. That is why we have this structure where we elect people to govern the country on behalf of us, public trust doctrine. And like the Supreme Court held, that public trust doctrine has been violated. So the only thing again would be for people to use their sovereign right to vote and, you know, bring about people who they think would at least now, this time around, keep that trust and not take decisions for private interests, but for in the best interest of the country. So that's because that top level political will is needed for system change in the country. However, no system change would succeed without the accompanying cultural change. So working at the grassroots level and where people will now start identifying corruption for what it is. I mean, it's not like we have a set of aliens in parliament. No, they are people like us, right, who we've sent to parliament, and whoever we call are corrupt in the public sector or private sector. So we see corruption ingrained in our culture. We accept certain things as very normal, which are actually really not normal if you take certain other developed nations, like conflict of interest, nepotism, cronyism, like, giving a call to a known person to get something done. The moment they get elected or they get appointed, they get lots of calls, from kids. So I can go on about, I think we've discussed this cultural side. So that change, I think, is happening because even, for example, I would like to say the private sector. Whenever we talk about corruption, that is one sector that stood the way, like it's not their problem. It's always the politicians or the public officials who are corrupt or the people. But we all know, and around the world, the private sector plays a massive role in high-level grand corruption, right? They are the massive colluding parts. They are the political financing agencies, right? So what they realized was when the economy crashed, was that, they can't be immune from that, right? Those days, if we look after our organization, bribe a couple of people and get our business going, we are good. But then realize when we crashed, we all suffered. So we had organizations reaching out to us saying it's high time the private sector does its part to fight corruption, and we want to work with you all, let's do something, we need to address the elephant in the room sort of thing. So these things have to go on. There are lots of blocks, but I see some hope there.
But nothing substantial has happened. Look what happened with regard to the health crisis. Dr. Vinya was here a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about the health crisis. A couple of days later, we saw how Dr. Anand was appointed as the NMRA head as well. We saw the sugar scam that Dhananath was talking about before as well. We saw things happening. Has the Aragale really made that change?
So that's what I'm saying. At the governance level, no, we are not satisfied with regard to the...
Right. My immediate next question is, who is the alternative? What is the alternative?
It's not who is the alternative. It would be people understanding what corruption does, and
not the aliens that you're referring to who are in parliament.
It's going to be people. And now, for example, if you ask what needs to be done is what you ask.
Let me rephrase that question for you, Nadisha, so it's much more easier for you to understand and for the benefit of our viewers. Now, there are several political parties active in the Sri Lankan political fray. If you want me to name them, I can name them. SLPP, SLFP, UNP,
yes.
SJB, NPP, and several other small organizations like the SLMC, the Upcountry People's Movement, so on and so forth. Sri Lanka Muslim Congress. Do you see an alternative for good governance next year in these political parties?
I am not going to pick a party here, but whoever it is, there is a very clear reform agenda that has now come up. together with the IMF governance diagnostic and the civil society governance diagnostic, we've looked at the problem of...
If the Arala has taught something to the people, what lesson would it have taught when picking up political parties at the next election?
That they cannot tolerate corruption. They cannot justify corruption. You know, we know they are corrupt, but you know, like that's how we voted, no. So, with, you know, I mean, there has to be zero tolerance, because with corruption, you can't have human rights, you can't have democracy. We can talk about it as we go on.
Thank you very much, Nadishani Pereira, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. On to my immediate right, as I said before, is Tharun Karuratna. On to my immediate left is Shihar Ranis, Executive Director of the Center for Investigative Reporting. Shihar, as a practice on the show, when there is a lady, we always give the lady to pose questions first. So I'm just going to act as if you're not here at the moment and pass on the ball to Tharuni.
Nadishani, this is regarding the Supreme Court ruling on the 14th of November, where it declared that several former top state officials were responsible for the country's economic downfall. You told the AFP that you sought a declaration from the court that the mishandling or inaction on the economy by the former heads of state had violated the fundamental rights of the people. And you also said that you did receive that declaration from the court. It is now up to the citizens to take any further action. Except for changing the voting patterns and looking at it in a more knowledgeable manner, what else do you suggest to the general public when taking action in that regard?
Well, there is, I mean, people keep asking about compensation. It's not a very easy path that's available because of the nature of our justice system, because of the backlog. So we know how long the average time taken if you file a case in the district court. So, you know, if you want to get compensation, you'll have to go to district court. And also it's not easy because in this situation, you'll have to show how the economic bankruptcy directly affected you and caused a loss to you. Right, loss of life, property, business, income, and then prove that to the court, and then you can try, you know, to get compensation. But I mean, it can take years. I'm talking about like not 10 years, even more than that, you know. So I think the better way is what you started with. You know, it's about thinking, considering what the Supreme Court said when they are voting again, and also by whoever, it's not just about not voting for these people, but bringing these standards of transparency, integrity, accountability as essential if you want to come and govern the country. You know, seeking people who have demonstrated that, if they, you know, to vote for. So it's that as well. And of course, I think now the Parliament, after all, they are responsible for public finance. And now the Supreme Court confirms that, you know, within that sphere, this has happened. Now, are they just going to sit and wait? I mean, as Parliament, they need to also think what action needs to be taken. And those public officials belong to certain institutions. Like you talk about the Monetary Board, Central Bank. So, I mean, what are the institutions doing? I mean, there has to be accountability. So, and I think the people's role would be to keep demanding for accountability. That is very important, because if we are not going to not ask and get this.
But Nadisha, don't you think now the ball is in the court of the parliamentarians?
That's what I said. They have a role.
They have a role to play.
They have a role.
But why aren't they playing that role? What is the opposition doing? What are they doing? Nadishani?
I mean, I will also like to ask.
You tell them they are not aliens, okay? Let's say they're human beings, but what are they doing? Tell me.
I think...
I beg to differ on that statement as well, but still for all. Now, you are saying they are not aliens, they are also human beings. So why aren't they doing
Power
it?
corrupts, Shamir. You know, that's something about...
So even the opposition is corrupt?
No. I mean, I'm not saying yes or no to that.
Don't be scared, Nadisha.
I'm not being scared, but in line with our organization policy, I mean, I don't think that's required here, but I will talk about what people can do and about the principles and what our learnings are.
So, Dharanath, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce chairman, Dumindu Hulangamua, has told the media that the government will be unable to meet revenue targets in the year 2024 despite increasing the VAT from 15% to 18%. So what's all this fuss about?
So what would happen, Shamir, when you increase the taxes, the economy will slow down because people have to cut down their consumption. When I am cutting down my consumption means I am also impacting someone else's income. For an instance, if I buy a bottle of water, if I am not buying it, that means the water bottle manufacturer will lose his income. So when this happens in, at a macro level, the economy slows down. And when the economy slows down, even when you increase the tax rates, your basically tax revenue, the government revenue will come down. I think that's what probably Mr. Hulangamu has meant in that statement. And anyway, when the economy is contracting, the tax revenue will also go down because economic contraction means you are winding up businesses, you are losing employment opportunities. So basically the tax base, to an extent, I mean, it's difficult to raise revenue in that context. So that's how I think things will unfold, and that's why I mentioned in my initial remarks that economy has to grow. Because without growing, we have to grow out from this crisis, and the only way that we can grow out is manufacture. And this business, you have to produce and sell, you have to trade, and to do trade you have to encourage the transactions, and to do that you have to have the global integration, and you have to sell for someone else by producing it here. So that's the only way that we can do.
But there are mixed signals even from the government ranks, Dharanath. If you look at it, Shehan Singh, the State Minister of Finance, had said that the economy will grow by 2% by the end of the year, that is 2024. Then you have the governor of the central bank saying that the economy will grow at a pace of 3% in 2024. What is right?
So there are multiple projections based on different data points. So everyone expects to grow economy at about 2 to 3%, but we have to wait and see because we really do not know after the tax revisions how things will unfold. On the other side, this year will be an election year, not only for Sri Lanka, but also geopolitically there's a lot of sensitivities. And also on top of that, it's an El Nino year, so we don't know how the weather would treat us. At the moment, as my chairman Murtaza always say, God is a Sri Lankan, so there's good rain. Because of that, I think our electricity generation is mainly skewed towards hydro, and that is a big relief at the moment. So, but we don't know, we can't expect that to happen for a long time.
But for all this, Dharanath, now my question in terms of the public, sitting as a journalist, but also in the point of view of the general public, you can't afford this. You have a 36% pay tax that's come into play. You have 18% VAT that has to come into play. Everyone above 18 years have to now open a tax file, a TIN number at the Inland Revenue Department. Everyone is stretched. How are they going to even eat in the next few weeks? I don't know.
No, absolutely, Shamir. That's what I mentioned. Every tax is on the extreme end. And what we have to think as a framework is on the tax competitiveness.
No, but the government has taken the easy way out. They have thought, okay, the easiest way to collect revenue is VAT. So let's impose VAT. And they've taken the easy way out. Is this what the IMF has dictated to Sri Lanka for $2.9 billion? Laughable.
So definitely, as I mentioned, the tax rates are on the extreme end. On the IMF, Shamir, in my understanding, I haven't done any negotiations with IMF, but they do not impose which tax will be imposed. It's the government of Sri Lanka who decides which taxes to be imposed. It's not IMF is coming and saying, okay, you have to increase VAT or you have to increase pay. It's the government's decision. But as you very correctly said, they have taken the easy route. But on the other side, I am not endorsing the VAT, but compared to other taxes, VAT is a reasonable tax. I am not saying VAT is good, but compared to special commodity levy or social security levy or the cess or the other taxes, it's better because it's only adding for its value addition. But what they could have done is, as I mentioned, generally in a lot of countries, the inflation basket items are exempted from VAT, or else you are removing the special commodity levy, so you bring down the food prices, which helps the poor people at least to afford food. So that's what they could have done. And also generally, now if you look at the VAT rate or the GST in other countries, they won't change this often. Like in Sri Lanka, we have changed it for about 8 times. And the threshold has been, I think, moved for about again another 10-12 times, because now it's at 60 million, it was earlier at 80 million, at one point it was at 300 million. So there has been multiple changes on the system, and when you
But
do
why can't they be empathetic towards the public?
No, absolutely, they have to be empathetic towards the public, and that's
This is an election year, and when such stringent economic controls are being imposed on the people, what are they expecting
No, absolutely.
out of an election?
So this,
I really don't
these
know.
all problems are, Shamir, interconnected. Now that's why I mentioned you have to look at the overall picture. Now let's look at where this revenue is going. This is like a bottomless pot, because basically this revenue is going to cover some of the state-owned enterprises losses. I am quoting this number multiple times. In 2022, for 8 months, Petroleum Corporation loss was 622 billion. And what are you expecting from pay? 160 billion. So that means if you even pay like 4 years of your pay according to 2024 estimations, it will only cover 8 months losses of one state-owned enterprise. And are you going to, I mean, to what stretch that you are going to increase the tax revenue to cover these losses? Same with Sri Lankan Airlines. I can recall for 8 months, only 5 institutes losses were about 1 trillion. So even the last year VAT wasn't adequate to cover 5 institutes state-owned enterprises losses for 8 months. So we are just trying to fill a bottomless pot, which is not going to work. And that's why we have to, on the other side, cut down the expenditure, and not only from the state-owned enterprises. There are people who have evading the taxes, and I think the government has the list. Those are politically connected. You have to recover the money from them on one side. On the other side, the government has to cut, I mean the political leaders has to set an example. When they cut down some of their expenditure, it may be a, I mean, negligible amount compared to like 1 trillion or 2 trillion, but it sets the tone, because without setting an example, how can you ask the poor people to sacrifice from their share while the others are not sharing the elite political cycle? So that's what I recommend.
If the government was so concerned about tax correction and how people are amassing wealth, the best way to move forward is to get the politicians in Sri Lanka, look at the properties that they own and how they amass that much of money. Easy way out, not rocket science.
Thanks. Dhananath, let me ask something on the, now this is the year we are trying to complete our debt restructuring and start repaying our foreign debts, right? So how will things unfold when we start repaying the debts, right? At the moment we are not repaying anything, right? And the negotiations are on, right? So once we, I mean, the government hopes to complete it by mid this year. How things will unfold once we start debt restructuring, debt repayments?
So as of now, Shiar, it would be difficult, because I mean we don't know what would be the conditions, because what is the grace period that we are going to get, and whether we will be able to grow the economy is all question marks. But generally, as we know, at a 2% growth, but last quarter we had, I think, about 1.3% growth. But at 2% growth, it would be very difficult. At least we have to reach out to 5, 6, 7% growth. To really recover the economy and start repaying the debt. But it all depends on what's the grace period that we are getting from our creditors, and also maintaining that credibility, because if we have to, what statistics shows, as you know, generally when a country goes through a debt restructuring process, 50% of those countries have to go through the second and the third debt restructuring process. And if we have to go for a second and a third debt restructuring process, it would be a disaster. On the other side, when a country goes through a debt restructuring process, generally their interest rates are sticking a little high than the market rates, because no one is, you know, we are restructuring debt means you are making a brand saying that you are not good for money. When you are not good for money, no one is willing to borrow money for you. So as a result, it is going to be definitely difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat, but it doesn't mean that I'm very pessimistic. I'm very hopeful on the other side, because I think, as Nadishani to an extent mentioned, the change has to happen from the people, and it's a new battlefield. Even till an election the elections has been postponed on one side, till an election is called, we don't know how people have changed or not. I mean, only that point we can measure it, but it's an open battlefield as far as I know. I think if that's favorable, they could have conducted the elections. So the reason why they are pushing it is also an indication that I'm hopeful people have changed, and the only solution and the only alternative is nothing but the rule of law and having a proper market system, and only that will rescue Sri Lanka. It's not this DSN Kumara or one individual who can rescue us. Even after the debt restructuring, it is only the people of Sri Lanka has to bear this burden and navigate through. That's how I see. I really cannot predict, but I can assure one thing: it is not going to be easy. Likely we have to go for another IMF program or for a second or a third debt restructuring. In that case, again, we have to go back to another IMF program if we have to go for another debt restructuring program.
Do you also see a repeated cycle of default?
Since we haven't completed the first round, I cannot predict, but I will not be surprised if we have to go for a second debt restructuring as we go now.
Dr. Vidya, who is DSN Kumara that Baranath is referring to?
I don't think this country ever had a DSN Kumara and will ever have a DSN Kumara. This year, Shamir, 16.9 million people will vote, right? Out of that, a significant percentage is going to be youth. And I am very confident that this year is going to be a very different election year. People will say, at the end of the day, our voters will be the same, they'll vote in the same way. It will not happen. There will be, different types of candidates who will run for presidential elections or parliamentary election. I think the mindset change that Nadishani was referring to, the social awakening, I think it's still there, not in residual form. It's in the subconscious mind of all the young, at least the young generation of this country. And I have seen hundreds and thousands of young people who will never leave this country, who will stay in this country and want to build a better country, right? So I'm not being very overly optimistic, but I have, I have hope, and I work with such young people, several generations. So I think it's going to be a turning point this year. And any party that's going to contest the elections, or any individual who is going to be contesting for the presidency, there are few key things that they will have to present to the people. One is how they are going to, overcome the economic crisis in very practical and, pragmatic way, not just theory. I think none of the parties, to my knowledge, have still come up with a definitive plan. They will say the general principle, you have to, export economy and all these things, but really no one has shown a way how we increase our production and how we generate, wealth for the country, not wealth for individuals and families or politicians, right? So they have to articulate that, number one. Two is on social cohesion, reconciliation, because we still haven't addressed the root causes that led to a terrible armed conflict in this country. So they have to show and really present to the people, particularly the young generation, who are expecting that something different has to emerge. And so I would say that even in selecting candidates, having greater women representation, youth representation, to nominating people who have a good track record, I think the parties cannot avoid that. And we have seen some candidates already, starting their campaigns, and some are non-starters. I don't know. I mean, people are laughing of their, coming and now already announcing their candidature. So I think the ground is still very open, and we have to nourish that new spirit of the new hope of our people, particularly the young generation. And I think we can have a greater hope that things will change. And I'm a firm believer that this time around it's not going to, the history is not going to repeat in the negative way.
Dr. Vinay, you spoke about youth trying to stay in Sri Lanka and try to revive the country's economy and make sure that we're on the right track. I think Dhananath, Theruni, Shrihar, and I also would not leave the country. We won't leave the boat yet, at least not immediately. Dr. Vinya, but interestingly, you spoke about how political parties have already announced their candidature in terms of elections and so on and so forth. But when you speak to these political parties, I've had them on the show as well. We've had them on the show, we've asked them about, they've always said we are a corrupt-free political party, we will do so much for the country. But when we ask them, what is the plan, what is the strategy you have for the country, they don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I recollect a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we had a famous political party representative on our show. We asked them, if you have read your manifesto, tell us what is the way forward for the country. Tell us the strategy. What is the laid down strategy for the next few months? They don't have an answer. So can you rely on them?
I think that's what the people should demand from them. I think that pressure will produce results. I think it has shown. I mean, even if you look at some of the changes that happened last year, it's because of public pressure coming from civil society, pressure coming from professional organizations. Otherwise, these were very formidable political, strong political forces that were trying to protect their interests, but they had to change. And now even the IMF, I think Dhananath knows it better, cautions, I think if I can use the exact words that they have used, they have said, identify the domestic risks stem from incomplete program implementation against the backdrop of a weak track record, delays in addressing banking sector vulnerabilities including rising dollarization, some upside inflation risk, and reform fatigue, particularly ahead of presidential elections in 2024. Social unrest could re-emerge, fueled by falling real incomes, including tax rate hikes and cost recovery pricing in the energy sector, insufficient anti-corruption efforts, and delayed local elections. I mean, delaying the local elections was a crime. We know the effects of the delays. Of course, people can say it's good to have the administrators running because those Pradesh Sabhas were anyway corrupt and all that. That's not true. I mean, there may have been instances like that, but the closest government or elected body was the local government authority. So 3 years not having the elected members was I think it also weakened democracy. The negotiating powers of the citizen was weakened. So I think it's very clear, all the danger signs are there, writing is on the wall. It's up to the rulers, the political parties, they have to transform themselves. No matter how old they are, some of them are already history. The new parties or reformed parties, they have to show to the people that they have really reformed, not by what they come and say in these forums. And I think that's going to happen. I'm very confident that it's going to happen. And we as citizens, professionals, media person, I think we need to put pressure on them and really remind that these are the issues, come up with serious answers. You have to be accountable and hold them accountable. That's the only way forward.
Dr. Vinay, I must tell you, we will push this agenda forward for sure. Ambika, I'll give Shah an opportunity to pose a question, but I just want to pose a question to Ambika. Ambika, now recently we heard the news that the Sri Lankan cabinet has proposed the implementation of a centralized SMS firewall system, and the pro system to be implemented by UK-based private company Infobid would function as an international A2P, a short messages service center. And we saw how the UNP chairman, Vajrabe Gunawardhan, spoke at a press conference today and said social media regulation is important. Then came the CEB censorship as well with regard to social media on its employees. Why do I get the feeling that we are going to live in a country like China in the future, like Singapore, like the Middle East, like Iran, where we are being regulated, where our freedom of expression will be curtailed? Why do I get that feeling?
Well, because I think that is what in the last couple of years in particular, and last year in particular, we had the online safety bill, we had the anti-terrorism bill. The government has been threatening us, and the correct word is threatening, with the proposed NGO bill. We, of course, it was public outcry and also criticism from all walks of life. It was the political parties, we had the trade unions, civil society, even citizens who protested against both laws, and that is what also led to the government withdrawing. Now, recently, a few weeks ago, there was someone had submitted and I think an RTI request to the legal draftsman's department, asking about the NGO bill, because that is actually a way in which you can control civil society, and you find civil society is the one that is gathering information, that is putting it out in the public sphere, that are filing cases, demanding answers. So one way to restrict is through the NGO bill. And they had said, the legal draftsman's department had said in response to the right to information request, that they had already sent it to the Ministry of Public Security in November, which means that it is in the hands of Minister Tehran Alas. And what I fear will happen in the coming, well, in this year actually, is that they might put these laws, they might gazette them, or they might place it on the order paper of Parliament again, because that is the instinct, I find, of the president and of this government. Because increasingly we have seen, as what Nadishani also said, after the Arala, we find that citizens are more aware of their civic rights as well as duties. And one of the duties is to ask questions of the politicians. And they have been doing that increasingly. We have seen also the increased use of social media to do that. And when people do that, we have seen the government actually taking a step back. The government responds when people have asked certain questions, right? So they do not like to do that, because although we claim we are a democracy, and we technically are, we are what I would call an electoral authoritarian state, in that democracy is where elections are concerned, but in every other way, the instinct of the state structures and of the government is authoritarian. They're constantly trying to shut down people asking questions, because they're not used to being held accountable, because they don't believe they are public servants, right? The doctrine of public trust. They believe that they are demigods and that they can do whatever they want, because impunity is entrenched. And this is also linked to the armed conflict.
But do you think, Ambika, with whatever is going on in the country right now, in terms of trying to put a stop on freedom of expression, that something big is going to happen in the next few months, in terms,
what does that mean?
like the Arala, where we witnessed where people were on the streets because of the fact that it's very, very difficult for them to survive. They would be on the streets to protest against the government for imposing taxes. It's very easy to say imposing taxes and tightening your belts is easy, but if the people can't survive, then they are going to be on the streets once again. So are all these efforts being taken to curtail that sort of protest that would come up in the next few months?
Very likely, because you find revolutions happen when there is really excessive poverty, and that is what leads to revolutions. And because we've already seen in Arala, we find that is why the president, the current president and the government have always been scared, because of what happened at the Arala, right, during the Arala. And the economic crisis, poverty, etc., they can see that there will be social discontent. And also they themselves are actively undermining social cohesion, because they have these hotlines. I think today or yesterday they announced a hotline saying anyone who has information about the drugs, please call this hotline and give information. That means you're also asking one person to spy on the other and undermining social cohesion, right? Then I think it was Narnath who said that, or was it Vinya who mentioned that in an interview the governor of the central bank had mentioned something about some sort of public need to come out and help identify people who were not paying taxes, I think, or something to that effect. Was it? There was an interview, I think, was mentioned. Was it?
There was a press article regarding that. Yeah.
Right. So therefore, those are really not good things. That if the way that you want to have control or your way trying to make people behave is by getting a citizen to spy on a citizen is really not conducive to social cohesion or creating a peaceful society. That only creates more discontent and also enables corruption actually. You get people to spy on each other is also something that will contribute.
So how would tip-offs be made if people don't spy on each other?
Good Lord, you think all this is happening based on tip-offs in this country? I would actually disagree with that. And the actual tip-offs, I think maybe we should file an RTI request and find out, yes, where do the actual tip-offs come and what do those tip-offs lead to, as opposed to people spying on each other and making complaints, because we have plenty of evidence of the latter, right? Where, like for instance, in the north, we have seen, because of excessive militarization, that people do make complaints about certain people saying, oh, they're involved in various things, and then you find the military intelligence would turn up at the house because it's easy to call anyone a terrorist, right? We have seen that. That is really not the way to go.
Dr. Vinaya, I want to ask, you are so optimistic on the change in the youth, right? But we have seen this country have undergone several, phases of such changes. Like we saw the ceasefire in 2002, right? And then tsunami, right? These are spots of opportunities where we could have changed this country. And then the end of the war, and then Yahapalne government, and then a strong lead in 2019. But voters never changed. They were still the same. What makes you to think that they will act differently this time?
I don't think the voters acted in the same way. I think some of the changes that we have seen 2015 and even the changes that happened non-violently, I mean, referring to youth uprising in this country, in 3 occasions they were violent uprisings, right? The first time we had seen a non-violent uprising of youth, right? So, I mean, there were, of course, instances of violence. That's really not, of course, not acceptable, and justice needs to happen. So, I think the voters have changed, but what has happened is we are still voters, and after that we don't demand any accountability, and that's it. The election is the only time that we exercise our.
But there is no way to demand it, right? Even now we don't have.
So that's why we need to have a change from our constitution to now some countries have power of recall by the citizens. So there are ways of, these lawyers know better. There are mechanisms in which you can hold the elected accountable even after elections. It's just that in our country we also have some of these measures, but they are never implemented. So I think this is the problem. But why I say that I'm optimistic is that every time when this country is at the brink of break, somehow or other something happens with people's consciousness changing, and it's not enough because every opportunity that is offered, we never had a leadership that could grab that opportunity.
Isn't that because the people are resilient, Dr. Vinaya?
Yeah, people have to be resilient. No, what choice do they have? We brag and say during tsunami we are a resilient nation. What choice other than because we have to protect ourselves? So and we
your only exceptional occasion was the Arala.
Yes,
where they came and changed.
Yes. So what I was going to say was that we could have sustained it. I mean, if we had different kind of thinking by our leaders, it would have been an opportunity to unite the country. I mean, say that, okay, we have faith in these youth who came forward. And these were not just, it was not a homogeneous one generation of youth. You are talking about professionals, you are talking about religious leaders, everybody came because there was that everybody's lives were disturbed and, it was affected. So, wanted a change, and that change, I think we could have harnessed that energy. There was tremendous energy, and this country always has the blessings of the international. It's not, we always say that international conspiracy and all that, but we know for a fact that the foreign nations genuinely love this country. I mean, the tourists come to this country not because of the campaigns or the marketing by the tourist board. It's because of the hospitality and all that people have experienced firsthand, and it's a word of mouth, that kind of thing. So here I think there are enough and more people to help us. Now, even now in this crisis in the health sector, I know for a fact and firsthand, there were many donors who wanted to help, right? But they didn't have any trust in the system. That was the reason why they couldn't help the health sector, because there was wastage, there was corruption. So now we have seen significant changes in these positions, and I think that way we can have hope. It was because of the pressure that the public and the professional organizations, including the media, was putting. So I think that may be incremental changes, but we can see a major change happening if we all get together and if there's synergy from all sectors with the support of the people.
Radhishani, question for you. I don't think there is any good candidate for this election. However, the duty of the civil society is to identify the correct person and present him or her to the people.
No, I disagree. Civil society, the definition I understand is that we have to be apolitical. We have to be the voice of the people, yes. The voice of the people to campaign for their rights, especially for those who cannot speak for themselves. We should not take a political stance, because we should be there when they get elected, whoever, to continue to hold them accountable, to call out when they go in the wrong path, when they don't uphold principles of good governance. So if I think it's a dangerous path for the civil society to support any candidate. Civil society should clearly set out the criteria. In fact, we have these campaigns, Clean Politics. We even distribute cards where say, look out before voting, like these are like, they're like, tick the box and see whether your candidate meets these basic criteria. It should not be like required to say those things, but unfortunately, since we seem to be tolerating a lot of corruption and bad behavior.
But based on what Dr. Whitney said earlier, things have changed now. You don't have to do that anymore. People have learned to...
So we reiterate. Yeah, so I'm saying, so we will continue to reiterate, until that becomes like, back of their heads, So there's a lot of work for us leading to the elections this year. To also give the meat, for the youth who are very passionate. So for example, we saw during Arala, a slogan was, we want a system change, right? But if you ask one of these young people, so what do you mean by system change? They get a little stuck. And I mean, fair enough, you can't expect every citizen, every young person to know how to change the system in a country. That's our job. So we come together, we have different expertise, so from governance, corruption side, from economy side, from social protection side, and we put together, for example, through the governance diagnostic, very clear reform agenda. If you want to do the system change that can help the economy come back, you have to do these reforms that are recommended in the governance diagnostic reports. And the good thing is that our report and the IMF one were so complementary. So this kind of knowledge we are in the process of sharing with people, simplifying it in a way normal people can understand, so that when politicians go door to door now asking for their votes, they need to ask this question. What are you going to do about this? About the expenditures in the public sector, about putting this information out in the website. I mean, you haven't still done it. You promised the IMF about tax exemptions, about public procurement. It was just about putting the information on a website. That's the first step, right? Not even a system change. It's just transparency. So people need to ask. It's not only the few of us asking it. So there's a lot of that awareness raising, talking about the criteria, talking about the duties of a parliamentarian. Because people tend to think, the duty is to come to the funeral,
What is the duties of a parliamentarian?
Two key things, right? They are the trustees of public finance. they have to take decisions about our scarce public resources in the best interest of the country. So that is their main job. They have to be present. When those things are discussed, they have to ask questions, right? They have to bring in checks and balances there. And secondly, it's about the legal system, right? They are the entity empowered to bring in laws, update laws, implement laws, right? I mean, to pass a law, it's the parliament, right? So we have the three arms of the state, right? The executive, legislature, and judiciary. But the people need more awareness on this whole social contract theory. What is the role of the ruler and what is the role of the citizen? You know, the citizen is the right holder. They are the duty bearer. They are not your law. They are not like, it's not about when they finally build that road using the allocated money in the budget. You don't go and say, my goodness, you are awesome. You did a great thing. Let's put your name on that road.
But I must tell you, Nadishani, yesterday, when a former minister went to Anuradhapura to his electorate, he was booed by the public. For trying to put up the RO plants that were provided by the public funds. So people are voicing their opposition now.
The whole
people
idea of this is our money, you know.
This is our money, this is not your money.
Exactly. So,
I have a question, Adishan. Now, you all have been working on this anti-corruption concept for a long time. But it's there, right? Though the government was changed by an Arala, if you talk to the grassroots level entrepreneurs, SME sector, they will always say they can't do things as they want because they want to pay a bribe or wait for a long time, right? So corruption is there at the grassroots level very much. It hasn't changed at all, right? I mean, we have an anti-corruption bill. What's the point of having an anti-corruption bill when you can't eradicate this or at least reduce the corruption at the grassroots level? And we are talking about all macroeconomic policies, right? Export, trade, and everything. But end of the day, the corruption is basically devouring everything. I mean, what's the way forward?
So bringing a law is one tool, one element. We need to have the legal system in place. But the more important thing which we have kept on reiterating is that you need to implement the laws. There's no point having laws just to, tick the box and then ensuring, in fact, it seems that you ensure that they cannot be implemented because you under-resource the agencies that are supposed to implement it. Or you ensure that they don't have independence to do their job. Talking about the bribery commission, the judiciary, the police, right? They need to be allowed to do their job. So that is one side. But the example you are referring to about SMEs and all, yes, we have two types of corruption. The big scandals you're talking about is what we call grand corruption. They happen at high level, white collar crimes, with collusion with big business, high level politicians, high level public officials, and what we call enablers, the lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, money laundering. That's the high level. But you also have systemic corruption, like a cancer in our society. That is the one that you see, you go to the normal ground level public institution.
It has become the norm of the day, right?
Yeah, and it's almost normalized, right? Like from the garbage collector expecting a little something, to, and it's become normal sometimes, and then that's why I said for that, first of all, you need that cultural change to call it corruption and to now connect it to what happens when you go to the big place. Why I bought the alien thing was that when you are corrupt, when you are entrusted with this little thing, you will be much more corrupt, grand corruption, when you get big resources under your hand, right? So if we don't change the culture, it will become like that. So I think that's why there's multiple work. Like if you take our organization, what we have, we say we have 4 sectors which we had to parallelly work. One is the political sector where, this governance change. But we say the community sector where you work with people, mothers, fathers, youth, religious leaders, about first of all calling out corruption, saying it's wrong. What is conflict of interest, and, that's all together. and
So,
so it's a big.
Dharanath, I asked you initially when we started the show, are you happy with the state of affairs in Sri Lanka right now? But when many rating agencies said that Sri Lanka's the US dollar against Sri Lankan rupee will go to approximately around 390 by the end of 2023. Many local economists in Sri Lanka were very upset that their prediction was wrong. Are you sad now?
So basically there were multiple predictions, Shamir, but IMF has in their report what they have mentioned is it's about a 27% rupee depreciation over a 3-year period of time. So what we believed was, I mean, what happens, how things happens is when the interest rates go down, generally the pressure on the currency adds because then people start spending money. So that was the basic framework to think about it. So we were basically mentioning about the framework. Of course, we did not do any predictions because we are not in that prediction game of where the currency will end and all that. But
no crystal ball in front of you.
No crystal ball in front of us. But at the moment the economy, what it indicates for us seems that the economy will slow down. I'm not saying it's a negative growth, but definitely it has to be slowed down because when the taxes are up, when people don't spend, it has to slow down.
So I have a question for you, Dharanath, from one of our viewers. Why is the government asking every citizen over 18 to register for a tax identification number or TIN, when a majority of citizens don't make rupees 1.2 million a year? They have also said that anyone who fails to comply risks facing a 50,000 rupee fine. Is this justified?
Yeah, so I think, Shamir, that tax identification number is a decision in the right direction, because how you do is, because everyone, the basis was to increase the tax base. So it's like taking an NIC number. You have to first register, and when you upgrade your income, then you have to pay taxes. But that registration has to happen. And when you only register, it doesn't mean that you have to pay the taxes or file the taxes. It's only when you meet that threshold, you have to pay the taxes. I think that paying taxes is also one of the elements of the system change, but it has to be, the tax system has to be justifiable, simple, and it has to stick to the main principle. So I think that increasing the tax base or expanding the tax base is a decision in the right direction, but it doesn't mean again that everyone who registers has to pay taxes. But again, this suggestion, if you recall, Shamir, it was there in multiple budgets. It was not the first time. It was, this one was in the 2023 budget. And then they said, okay, when you are getting the vehicle revenue license, when you are opening a current account, you have to get the TIN number. But I think it's in the right direction. But best way is think about the way to think about the taxes is on the tax competitiveness and on the tax principles. Instead, what we are doing is we are imposing taxes all around, which will complicate the system further and which will make people unhappy, and it will also erode our tax revenue because people will start evading the taxes when the system becomes too complicated.
So I want to pose this question to the four of you. It's going to be somewhat of a tall task, but in your respective fields, if I told you, Dr. Vinya, let me start off with you. If I told you, sum up or give me a few definitions for the year 2023, how would you define the last year?
Weak governance, lack of proper vision for the country, lack of empathy, and no political will to address corruption.
Dharanath, yourself?
Yeah, lack of political will, but it's mixed in my view. There are some policy changes in the right direction, but half completed, especially on the social safety net, and on SOE reforms. There's some progress, but it hasn't completed. But on the other side, very disappointed with the governance reforms and some of the leadership and the example set by the leaders who were responsible and who could have taken more responsibility on the crisis and on setting the reform agenda. They have been very lethargic and they haven't set the example for people to take the burden and drive the economy.
Ambika?
Further entrenching impunity, increasing authoritarianism, lack of political will to tackle the root causes of the ethnic conflict or to address gross violations of human rights that took place during the conflict, intention to crack down on civil society and to shrink civic space, increasing extrajudicial killings, custodial deaths, police torture, state enabling violation of the religious rights of the Muslim and Tamil communities by destroying places of worship, militarization of policing. Yeah, I think that's enough, no?
I was waiting for you to end. Nadishani.
Repeat the question, Shah.
So my question is, if you were to sum up 2023, the year that just finished, how would you define the year 2023?
So I agree with a lot, but if I'm to say it in my own words, lack of political will to eradicate corruption, to practice good principles of good governance, lack of leadership. Now, when I say leadership, it goes without saying good leadership. I don't think we've ever had good leaders in this country. A good leader cares. You know, Doctor keeps talking about empathy. You
So
care.
you're saying, in other words, Ranil Wickremesinghe doesn't care.
So I will not go to in other words, but I'll continue.
No, but Nadishani, you said the leader doesn't care, so I can only think of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the leader of the country now. So I'm just trying to be specific.
That would be my conclusion. I mean, the thing is, there's no point in anyone saying words. Okay, we need action. We need to demonstrate that you are a leader who actually cares for the people. So it is, and also huge suppression of civic space and trying to create this chilling environment when we are worried, you know, and we have memories of the recent past, right? So, you know, again, having to worry about your safety after, say, voicing against corruption or being a whistleblower in this country. So that's a problem. And suffering among the vulnerable people. But I will also add that little positive thing that I said, people continuing to think more than they thought, and making the connection between governance and their lives, understanding that this is our money that is being wasted, that is being stolen, you know, so that also kept happening.
But don't you think stolen asset recovery should be something that should be in the agenda of this government?
Well, because of the IMF agreement, it is in the agenda to the extent of bringing a law. So they have to bring this law by March this year, and it seems that they are in the process. Now we've several times requested that we can intervene and contribute, you know, knowledge, expertise, know-how, but we haven't got that opportunity yet, which is sad, because they need to get experts in the country to join, and we can also get international experts to give in and to review this law that they are coming up. But having the law is just that one step, right? Because there are a lot of things they could have done to start the process of recovering stolen assets, even without the law. So we didn't see any action in that direction. So yes, it should be a problem.
Sarah, do you have any questions? Or
Yeah.
Yes.
So recently, in accordance with the International Anti-Corruption Day, TISL and also PAFREL, CPA, MPC, they all said that the citizenry should not let the reform moment slip away. And of course, Shamir brought up before that a politician was recently booed away from the village when he came. But still, many financially vulnerable people say that they vote for politicians in order to fulfill their requests, something as simple as maybe getting a road made, getting clean drinking water for their village. And this is an election year. Do you think there'll be enough time for, as you said, you know, the knowledge to be passed on to all those people who have that same old mindset of voting for the people who give them promises? Do you think there's enough time for that?
Time is a challenge. So we need to all work together, and there is one party that can do a huge role. The media, because I mean, you have access to the entire country. They sit from 7 to 10 p.m. every day watching your teledramas. It's part and parcel of their life. Please use your channels and, you know, radio, TV, social media, and just this is one thing you can do for this country, for the people, for the use, and in creative, interesting ways. Take that message. We do as much with our limited resources, but our access is so much less compared to the access that main media channels
That's why we have
like
people
you
like
have.
you, Nadishani, coming on the show on a day like today. Dhananath, I recollect a few years ago, this was, I think, if my mind serves right, I think this was in the year 2019 when we had Murtaza, Dr. Vijayawardena on the show. And when Murtaza said our country's economy is in the ICU, I was shocked. I was taken aback, and I asked him, "Are you really sure?" I said, I still remember, I told him, "You say this every year, but nothing has gone wrong. We've always stood strong." And then come 2021. There you go, like prophecy. And he seemed to have a crystal ball at that time, though you don't have one at the moment. Are we at least out in terms of the ICU treatment that we are receiving in terms of the country's economy?
No, Shamir, we are still at the ICU. And it will take, again, I have mentioned this before, it will take about another 8 to 10 years for us to come out from the woods and from this crisis.
8 to 10 years?
8 to 10 years. No, I'm speaking with some numbers and statistics, because if you look at our per capita GDP, which was around $4,000, and now it has dropped down to about 3,000, 3,200, and at a 2% growth, you can calculate how long will it take to recover for where we were, and that's the reality. And that's also at to an extent inflated dollar rate. So ideally it takes 10 years, and it's not rocket science, it is what has happened in every part of the world if they have gone through this crisis. And I mean, that's the reality, let's admit that. And what we can do is, as I mentioned, the only way to come out is to grow the economy. And to grow the economy, you have to do the reforms, and it's not negotiable. And as Murtaza on that day said, we saw the treatment of the ICU, and we are still at the ICU, and people are paying for that. The only way out, but it doesn't mean we are hopeless and pessimistic. I'm very hopeful, as throughout the show, Shamir first asked about where the hopes come from, and then he brought the example of people booing for the politicians. So it indicates that the hope is there. No, I'm very serious, because I think we really do not know. We should not underestimate what people think and the struggle that they are going through in their hearts, because in my view, Arala was not something where people came to street. It was in their hearts, and I think that feeling is still there, and that's the hope that we have. While even people, the same people who basically recommended wrong policies had to leave the country, and now I think probably they have changed. They are, because they had to experience the bad medicine that they recommended earlier. So in that sense, I am hopeful, but I admit it's a slow process. It is not an overnight process. It will take a couple of years, but I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful that a lot of people will join and push the system. And it's the only solution, or the alternative, is not any political party or any political leader. Of course, it has to come through that system, but it is the system, and that system is the rule of law and the market-based system, where the private sector and the people do the businesses, and government does their role as a limited government, and that's the only way out.
So Dhananath, there is an upward tick when it comes to foreign remittances. When it comes to tourism, those are positive, isn't it, as far as the country is concerned?
Yes, so remittances, I mean, it has improved compared to last year, but it was, to an extent, if I remember right, the month on month, it was slightly on a declining trend, but I mean, it is definitely better. Tourism is better, but what we have to remember, Shamir, tourism has always been, it's very sensitive area. If something happens in the global markets, it again tends to drop. And the reason we are getting tourism is not that we did any miraculous thing. It is basically, as Dr. Vinya said, people
You're
want
taking all the glory away from the ministry.
the ministers. Yes, exactly. No, I mean, okay, they can take the glory, but the truth is, you know, it is basically people want to visit, and it's a beautiful island. I think it's too small to fail on the other side. So people really want to visit. So I think that's definitely positive. Tourists has to visit, and it's a positive indication because then it activates the economy. A lot of small and medium enterprises are connected to the tourism ecosystem. So it's all positive. That's what I said in your previous question. It's a mix here. We have made some progress on debt restructuring. We have also some mishaps on the other side. The governance reforms hasn't really taken off. But it's a mix here. But I think it should go from 2024 is the critical year, because with elections, as Lee Kuan Yew famously said, it's an auctioning of non-existing resources in Sri Lanka when it comes to an election. So if they do the same, we will definitely go back to 2022. But I think we all have to work hard to make sure for making sure that we won't slip back to where we were.
And elect the right people.
Absolutely.
So my question is based on what Dhananath said now, right? It's an election year, and we are going through a very hard reform process, right? Now you will see the political parties coming and, you know, giving all the promises, sugar-coated pills, right? So how concerned are you on this? Because the voters go on what these people say, the leaders say, or the, you know, these candidates say. So it's an election, it's a year where people should not be misled, right? And they have to understand the importance of the reforms, right? But still, I don't see that. How concerned are you on that?
We are very concerned. I completely agree with you, Shiar, because people sometimes they understand, sometimes that understanding is not into that full, you know, the depth it should have been. So that's why I said the social safety net, this allocation is 200 billion. One state-owned enterprise lost 600 billion in 8 months. So definitely that has to happen, because only when the state-owned enterprises reforms takes place, you can improve the social safety net, and people need to understand that. And there is no magic wand that the government has to announce a completely different reform package, because we are basically still in the ICU. You cannot have, you know, it's not a time that you experiment a lot of things, because you are still in the ICU. In the ICU, you are very cautious. So we are very concerned. Definitely it's a challenging year. But at the same time, the hope also comes from that challenging year. Let's see how the people would react. But I'm hopeful that things will on the better side. It's not because of any political party. It's because of the people's will.
But you spoke about the SOE reforms, right? The loss-making entities. But it also comes with a very sensitive area where millions of people are working there, right? If you go through a proper reform, I think we need to cut down the state employees by 1/3.
Correct.
Or 2/3.
No, absolutely. So I think on the state-owned enterprises, there are about 250,000 to 300,000 employees who are working. But I think the reforms, if you are shrinking down the government, it has to come from the other sectors. So it's a slow process. Definitely there has to be a VRS at the initial stage, and then there has to be merge on the certain institutes. And on the SOEs, there are, I think, about 8-10 that you can easily close down, because it's just a appointment by the directors and all that by the minister. There are no physical institute or anything. They are just taking the director board allowance. So those has to be closed down. Those are all political appointees. So definitely there has to be a cut down. Shiar, there's no two words about it, and I'm not going to say no, it's not like that. You know,
which means people are going to lose jobs, and their livelihood is at a stake.
And that's going to affect the country's economy.
Exactly.
It will be on a slow process, because when on the transformation process, there are two sides. One is for certain sectors, they will earn a better salary. Because now, for an example, on what we saw on the telecom reforms, when the transformation took place, actually their salaries was on par with the international rates with the acquisition by this Japanese company. So it is not all, you know, bad in all sense. But definitely, let's admit, when the politicians have appointed their henchmen to these institutes, I mean, how can you make that institute productive without a reasonable restructuring? So that has to happen. But it doesn't mean that you ask them to go, you know, leave the job overnight. There has to be a slow process. There will be a grace period. There will be a VRS. So then they will have some opportunity, and then they are.
Calculations have to be taken.
Absolutely, but that's the truth. I mean, you can say no, we can do all that, but I think that will be a very political statement. But definitely, it would be a very hard time. I mean, how many private sector people have lost jobs, and how many now? The thing is, since with the inflation now, Shamir and all of you know, when someone leaves from your respective organization to recruit the same position, your cost is probably about 50-60% higher, or probably 100% much higher.
Much higher.
So basically, either you can't recruit because your revenue hasn't increased, your profitability hasn't increased. So basically, you're winding up in that sense. So when you're allowing someone to leave and when you're not recruiting, means you're basically taking the job opportunity out. So that happens in the private sector, and a lot of people are losing jobs when the economy is shrinking. So there is no magic way that we can only select certain sections and keep them, and that's why I recommended there has to be a very strong social safety net that is for the most vulnerable people. There are a lot of very poor people who are really fighting for daily survival. For that we have to rescue, and that rescue has to come from the money that we are saving from those colossal losses of those state-owned enterprises. So I think that's the mix that we have.
So you're trying to say, Dharanath, when the Minister of Finance or the President himself says abracadabra, I want something out of this black hat, it's not going to happen as he expects it to happen. Is it? It's going to be a tough call.
I think it will take time, Shamir. It will take some
when
time.
You're saying
but
8 to 10 years, it's a long time.
That's too long for sure. But I mean, in terms of the reforms, some reforms like the state sector employment reforms, it will take a little. I mean, it cannot happen overnight, because if we don't do those reforms, the other side is there will be a pension crisis, because at the moment. Because if you can't pay the pensions, then it will again come back to the same people. And on the one last point, now we saw a news story that the central bank has got the nod from the cabinet to increase the inflation to about 7%. So again, look what is the repercussions, because when the debt restructuring happened on the local bonds, especially for the EPF and the ETF, what was told was we are assuring 5% inflation, so at least you get a real gain of 4% when you are assured with a 9% interest rate. So now when your inflation is at 7%, actually your real gain is about 2%. So that's why I said, when you do not have the policy framework right, it finally, this burden will come to people's shoulders. There is no other, right. I mean, I'm not recommending, but that's what people has to be cautioned, and that's why they should support the reform agenda.
Yeah, so Dr.
May I make an important point, because I think something that keeps getting missed here, because it's like the sacred cow, but it relates to both the you're talking about the SOEs and the restructuring, the loss that we're making, as also the corruption, the procurement, etc., is the military, because that is massive. It eats up a large portion of the budget, but more than that, there is a lot of financial mismanagement, possible misappropriation. The Auditor General reports are public documents, but if you look at them, I have been tweeting since 2020 the most egregious information that I found is it's never debated in Parliament. You find even the opposition politicians do not want to touch it. Now, for instance, in the 2022 audit report, it said that the Sri Lankan army didn't have a main procurement plan for 3 years. The plan for the year under review which was for 47.45 billion. Not million, billion. It did not mention the number of units of goods or services to be procured. Then how on earth is that a procurement plan? And that is a hell of a lot of money, but no one is talking. Then again, apparently, 367.59 million, they procured building materials. They didn't adhere to procurement plan. So where do you think that money is going? And if we're talking about Ape Sali, this is Ape Sali, but why is no one, not even the opposition, speaking about all the money that the military is.
So when I asked that question on Nadisha is not responding.
What? No, she didn't. You didn't ask her that question.
I asked her, what is the opposition doing? She's not responding. Anyway, so Dr. Vinya, very quickly before I give some time for your closing remarks for all 4 speakers, you spoke about politicians should reform themselves. Will that ever happen in Sri Lanka? Will that ever happen? Is that a practical solution? Can we think that it's going to happen?
We'll wait and see. I think that's all I can say. Because if that doesn't happen, I think they are history. I think they are gone. So,
So then there'll be a lot of people who will be history in this parliament.
Yes, yes. And we have seen that in the last election as well.
But do you see credible people coming to politics now at least?
We have to make that happen. So that's where the citizens' education.
Dr. Veena, let me ask you a personal question.
in public.
It can't be a personal, but live. It's a very personal question to you.
Okay.
Let me put it that way.
But not a private question.
Now, not a private question. Dr. Veena, now, you are a very learned, intellectual person in Sri Lanka. We all know, we respect you for the work that you've done, through the Sarvodaya movement or the Remo. If someone asks you, will you contest an election in Sri Lanka, what would be your answer?
No.
Why?
Because as Nadishani says, I think what you just said about the work that I have been doing, I think we have a role to play.
So how do you expect, Dr. Veena, for good people to come into politics in the country?
Well, there are other good people. I'm not the only one.
No, I was asking, people like you.
Yeah.
I can mention that to Dhananath or Ambika was once a nationalist candidate from political party, then Nadishani or whoever it is. I can ask you, but I'm asking you because you said you are the one who suggested that reforms should happen as far as politicians are concerned. So I'm asking you, if you are told to contest
so it's
the
not
election,
just the individual. So it has to be. There has to be a transformation of political parties. Now they won't.
But this is what I hear from everyone,
No, but
Dr.
then there's
Veena. Everyone I speak to tell me, who come on the show, there has to be reforms. But when I ask them, would you contest elections? Please leave me out of
because then you think that the reforms only should come from the political setup. Yes, it has to come through the political system, but to get there are a lot of other things to be done outside, right? So there are ways in which we can influence. We have seen changes happening because of the interventions that we have been doing. So we'll have to see.
Your private life will remain a private life, not a public life. So I want to close today's show, but I want to give each speaker 2 minutes each to wrap up their concerns, their thoughts, the way forward for Sri Lanka. We are just heading towards 2024. It's the third page in 365 pages that we have in the country as far as the calendar is concerned. So let me start off with Nadishani. What's the way forward for Sri Lanka? And 2024, what are your expectations?
Yes, I just want to start by just adding to the conversation. I think we are not making this connection between economic reform and governance reform adequately. At least in my opinion, it's an illusion to think you can have impactful, successful economic reform while not doing the governance reform. Because, okay, so you're doing economic reform to generate income, right? And then, you're putting it into a basket or, say, a bowl with lots of holes. Corruption. It's coming into the same system that has these critical governance gaps and corruption vulnerabilities. So, one thing that this economic crisis showed and even made a normal average citizen understand, hence they asked for system change in the Arala, and then thereafter was confirmed by the Supreme Court, was that behind the bankruptcy of the nation, the root cause was governance and corruption. Or you say lack of governance and corruption. So without addressing the root cause, why are we thinking that you can do that reform and this and tax and this and that without looking at the tax fraud, tax evasion, tax exemptions given to cronies, and then doing tax reform? That's not tax reform. You're just again abusing your power, and that is again corruption, abusing your power for private gain. And you're saying that you're doing reform. And this is why I said there is no political will and there is no leadership, because we are not seeing the governance reforms. And when you're really, really pressed by the IMF and you have to show something, you bring something like a law which looks pretty on paper. Again, it could have been better, but okay. And then you ensure that it's, you're not implementing it. I mean, at least now take the actions necessary to implement this new Anti-Corruption Act, which is a progressive one, many improvements compared to what we had. Sounds almost magical, certain aspects of it. Let's implement. I mean, we didn't see this budget allocating money for the big asset declaration digitalized system, which is an essential element. In fact, it's also part of the benchmarks of IMF. I have no idea what are the plans here. They have to first consider it into their plan and then try and raise money. There are organizations that will help with the funding. Right. So I think making this connection, and so people should not forget this connection. Whenever any politician who wants to come back to power say that I've done this reform, this I've done, ask about the governance reforms. And if you want to know what some examples, because they keep lying. They keep lying, saying we did reform. You manipulate the social media, you confuse people, no? Or you bring some other nonsensical story, drama, and when some critical questions are being asked. So people have to understand what these reforms are, and they can refer to these documents. And I think, and of course, one more let me add, do not allow the government to take away your freedom of expression and the fundamental rights that are guaranteed, because without that, you won't be able to hold the government or anybody accountable.
Thank you very much, Radhishani Perera, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. I now move my attention towards Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute.
It was said in economics, the basis of economics is the scarce value of the resources. But however, in politics, the first principle is forgetting the first principle in economics. So I think the way forward for 2024 is for people to remind our policymakers on the first principle of economics and not allowing them to forget the first principle of economics. I think there are 5 main reforms which are non-negotiable regardless of which political party, which collective forces comes to power. First is, as I mentioned, the improvement of the social safety net for the betterment of the poor people. Second is the state-owned enterprises reforms. Third is the governance reforms and anti-corruption drive that we have to do. Fourth is the trade reforms. And fifth is sticking to the IMF program and the debt restructuring. If we can secure these 5 with this election challenging year and reminding the politicians that not to forget the first principle in economics, I think we will have a better 2025.
Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute. Dr. Vinya Araratna, President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association.
Yes, so I think I'll stress on the point that Dhananath brought up, that is the social protection. I think, this year there will be many people who will be again driven to the margins and who will be very vulnerable. So we need to protect them. Last year we have seen the highest number of, say, for example, the child abuse cases, sexual abuse, very unfortunate. So we need to really protect these vulnerable groups. So we need to have a social protection system which is universal. I mean, at every stage of your life cycle, that is non-negotiable, and I think the state has a big responsibility towards that. Any party which is contesting elections, I think they have to really give their views on whether it is Aswasuma or whatever the other scheme that they propose to protect the vulnerable. And also there is a responsibility by the society and also the corporates and to really help each other. Now we have the Human Development Report for Southeast Asia, which was released by UNDP last week. We are one of the most inequitable societies, which wasn't the case before, right? So I think we have to change that. And if you look at the Global Giving Index, Sri Lanka was on the top 5 just 7-8 years ago. Now we are not even in the 20 list of 20 nations, which is very unfortunate, because we have had that social protection not just by the state but by the people. So I think we need to also remind ourselves about caring for each other, and also the corporates are also exploiting. There's something called, I think, greedflation or something, which is not just the normal inflation, but the corporates really deliberately wanting to make profit and using inflation as an excuse to mark up the prices and make a profit. So I think these unethical practices need to be controlled, and the citizens, bottom line is, as citizens and professionals, we really need to play a role in making, somehow putting the pressure and demand accountability and transparency from our rulers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vinya. Ambika Satyanathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka.
I think, although, as I said, we are a democracy, many of the democratic values have really not been internalized. There are feudal elements, and also we are a society politically particularly driven by patronage. This is part of the problem, and this is the awareness raising that we must do. To take on from what Nadishani said, there's also a lack of understanding about the indivisibility and interconnectedness, interdependence of civil and political rights and socio-economic rights. Because if you're protesting against, poverty, about economic marginalization, you need to have the right to protest. And that's why the government is also trying to bring about laws to prevent you from doing that, which brings me to accountability. Accountability often, in the past was talked about only in relation to the armed conflict, the ethnic conflict, for human rights violations. But that has enabled lack of accountability actually, because the politicians, even the military police were able to do what they wanted. The excuse was, we are countering terrorism. And that has seeped through the entire system, and of course we see that with the economic crisis, everything else, corruption, etc. So we need accountability at every level, but also we must address the past. We cannot get away from it. We have not seen any sincere effort by the government. They only think that they have to bring about laws and set up institutions. There is no political will, there is no implementation. They're trying to bring about yet another law and set up yet another commission, while we are faced with a graveyard of hundreds of past recommendations that have not been implemented. Finally, public institutions. We have seen the public institutions, let's take the police for instance, are dysfunctional. They most often break the law, they disregard the law, and therefore, which is what makes it more difficult to, shall we say, increased respect for the rule of law. Vinya mentioned about increase of, sexual abuse, violence. Those kind of cases and people I deal with all the time, you know what? We actually most often don't go to the police. Because when you go to the police, their problems increase. You try to find other ways of helping them, because either they don't take the complaint, they are abusive, they disregard them, they sometimes take their phone numbers and harass them. Then they ask the women to go and find the man, for instance, if they want to serve summons, right? And they say, find the man, we don't know where he is. And even when you get protection orders, which judges are reluctant to give, and the man disregards it, the police does nothing. So therefore, the police as an institution, we need to look at that again, reimagine, restructure. But to say that the public institutions that are meant to protect the public and are meant to serve the public aren't. So we have severe dysfunctionality, and my fear is that going forward in 2024, the government is only going to increase that by bringing about more repressive laws, disregarding the rule of law, trying to shut down civil society.
Thank you very much, Ambika. Thank you very much, Dr. Vinya Ariratna, President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute. Nice to see you, Dhananath, after some time.
Thank you, sir.
You are busy with a lot of work, I hear, on Wednesdays.
Thank you very much for having me. My New Year resolution was somehow get to the show back again.
So nice to have you on board again. Ambika Satyanathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, and also Nadishani Pereira, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you very much, Theruni Karunaratna, as well as Shiharani's Executive Director of the Center for Investigative Reporting, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The choices we make today create the future that we are dreaming of. Take care and good night.